If someone had told me that morning that I would end the day on my knees, crying and begging for forgiveness, I would have laughed in contempt. I was a man accustomed to controlling entire rooms with arguments, not losing my footing. Yet it all began the moment something I believed to be inert started to bleed in my hands. My name is Alejandro Montoya. I am a pathologist, university professor, and researcher with over 30 years of experience. I have spent most of my life in laboratories, classrooms, and research centers. My world has always been made up of slides, microscopes, reports, and numbers. I taught future doctors to trust only what can be measured. For me, everything that escaped the scientific method was illusion, fear, or collective ignorance. Before I continue, I need you to understand the gravity of what I am about to share. This is not a philosophical reflection, nor a story meant to evoke emotions. It is a testimony that shattered my certainties. If you feel the need to hear something true until the end, subscribe now and stay with me. And write in the comments which city you are following this story from. Your presence here is not by chance. That day, I was following my usual routine. The city was filled with religious celebrations, something I had always considered a cultural nuisance. While families gathered and streets were adorned with symbols of faith, I walked convinced that all of that was merely empty tradition. Where others saw devotion, I saw emotional weakness. Where there was reverent silence, I felt irritation. This attitude did not stem only from study. 10 years earlier, my wife, Mrs. Isabel Montoya, died after a long illness. While I sought treatments, protocols, and specialists, she held a simple rosary and repeated that she was not alone. That phrase echoed in me like a cruel provocation. When she died, something inside me closed off. I decided that I would never accept a God who, in my view, had remained silent. At the university where I teach, my authority was never questioned. I easily dismantled arguments, exposed beliefs with data, and felt protected by reason, until I realized that observing from a distance was no longer enough. I needed to confront. I needed to prove before everyone that what they called sacred was nothing more than common matter. What I did not know was that in making that decision, I was about to cross the exact point where my certainty would begin to crumble. At the university where I worked, I was known for not tolerating sentimentality. My pathology classes left no room for metaphors or consolation. I spoke of dead tissues, organic failures, and cold statistics. I repeated to my students that life is a series of unstable chemical reactions, and that death is merely the predictable end of that process. Many admired me, others feared me, none questioned me. That morning I entered the classroom as always. The air conditioning kept the environment artificially cold, a comfortable contrast to the heat of the city. For me, that climate represented order, control, and reason. As I explained cellular degeneration on the board, my eyes scanned the front row. It was then that I noticed something out of place. A young student was discreetly wearing a small symbol of devotion under his shirt. That bothered me more than it should have. I interrupted the class. I pointed at him and asked him to stand up. I asked, in front of everyone, if he believed that object could alter diagnoses, heal diseases, or change the laws of biology. He tried to respond respectfully, speaking of hope and protection. I used data, technical terms, and logic to dismantle each word. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The awkward silence in the room was enough. When he sat down, his face was red and his eyes downcast. That was, for me, an intellectual victory. Today I know it was another step in my downfall. As I left the university, the distant sound of bells and chants still echoed through the city. Instead of going home, my steps took me to the cemetery where my wife is buried. In front of Mrs. Isabel Montoya's grave, I read again the phrase she had asked to be engraved, "Your faith has saved you." That always seemed like an affront to me. I ran my hand over the cold stone and felt the anger I believed I had controlled return with force. It was not just disbelief, it was resentment. As the celebrations advanced toward the central moment, something inside me crystallized. It was not enough to observe, criticize, or teach. I needed to expose. I needed to prove, before everyone, that what they venerated was nothing more than common matter. If God existed, he should respond. If he did not exist, someone needed to have the courage to show that. I made my decision there, in silence, in front of a tombstone. Before moving on, take a pause with me. If you've already realized that this story is heading toward a point of no return, write in the comments what you would have done in my place. The next step changes everything. I entered the church with a cold heart and a sharp mind. The basilica was packed to the last space. The air was heavy, laden with human warmth, the smell of melted wax and incense rising in slow spirals. The light of the late afternoon streamed through the stained glass, coloring the faces of the kneeling people. Everything there seemed carefully prepared to provoke emotion. In me, it provoked only impatience. I moved down the central aisle with firm steps. While others walked with their heads down, I kept my gaze lifted. I saw elderly people leaning on canes, mothers holding restless children, and young people with their eyes closed in deep prayer. To me, that was not faith. It was blind surrender, a collective waste of hope. Each step I took reinforced the decision I had made hours earlier in front of Isabel's grave. When the central moment arrived, silence enveloped the space, a dense silence, almost physical. The people rose and formed an orderly line toward the altar. I observed the priest, an elderly man with slow gestures and a serene gaze. There was something in that tranquility that bothered me. It was not fear. It was as if he knew something I refused to accept. It was my turn. I extended my hand, rigid, mechanical. I heard the ritual words pronounced softly. I responded automatically, without emotion. When the object was placed in my palm, I felt nothing but the dry contact of something too light to carry such importance. I did not move. I remained there, motionless, as murmurs began to rise behind me. I slowly turned my body and faced the crowd. I raised my hand for everyone to see. The silence spread like a wave, advancing from pew to pew. I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes fixed on me. That was the stage I had been seeking. I closed my fingers tightly. The dry sound of something breaking echoed through the temple. Some people covered their mouths. Others began to cry. I spoke loudly, clearly, without shouting. I said that it was merely matter, that there was no mystery, no miracle, only illusion. I challenged out loud what they said was divine. I waited for an immediate reaction, a punishment, a sign. Nothing happened, no sound, no tremor. Just the restrained sobbing of a priest kneeling on the floor, collecting the fragments with trembling hands. The community did not react with violence. They reacted with prayer. That destabilized me more than any supernatural response. I left the temple believing I had won. What I did not know was that the answer would not come there. It would come with me, silently, on the way back. If you're still here, stay. What happened next cannot be explained with simple words. I drove back home as if fleeing from something that insisted on following. The streets were quieter, but inside me, everything was noisy. In the pocket of my blazer, I carried what remained of what had been broken. I did not think of it as something sacred. It was merely material for analysis, evidence, trophy. I needed to confirm with my own instruments that nothing there contradicted the laws I had always defended. My residence was close to the university campus. In the basement, I maintained a private laboratory equipped with microscopes, slides, reagents, and everything I needed to work away from prying eyes. That was my territory. There, nothing escaped logic. When I closed the door behind me, I felt a sense of relief. The world of faith had been left outside. I put on my lab coat with the automatic gesture of someone performing a daily ritual. I prepared the workbench, turned on the lights, and positioned a sterile glass slide. Only then did I reach into my pocket to retrieve the fragments. It was at that moment that my body reacted before my mind. My fingers were damp. It wasn't sweat. The environment was cold. When I opened my hand, the air seemed to disappear from my lungs. What I saw was not dry dust or brittle residue. A thick red liquid slowly dripped between my fingers and fell onto the metallic surface. The sound was rhythmic, heavy. I looked at my hands for cuts. There were no wounds. Even so, the liquid continued to ooze. It did not come from me. It came from what I was holding. I tried to wash it off. I turned on the faucet and scrubbed hard, almost angrily. The water did not lighten the red. On the contrary, it turned into something even denser. The metallic smell filled the room. I turned off the faucet with a sharp motion and stepped back. My heart raced. Still, my mind sought an explanation. Chemical reaction, contamination, some unusual bacteria. I needed to prove it. I placed a sample on the slide and adjusted the microscope. My hands trembled, but the gesture was precise. I took a deep breath and looked. What appeared before my eyes was not plant matter or common organic residue. They were living, organized, pulsating cells. It made no sense. I felt something snap inside me. If you are listening to this attentively, brace yourself. What I saw next changed everything. I adjusted the focus again, convinced that my eyes were betraying me. I increased the magnification, searching for any sign of error, any flaw that could restore control to my reason. What appeared before me was not plant material or common organic residue. They were human blood cells, perfectly preserved, intact red blood cells suspended in living plasma. That would already be impossible outside of a body, but that was not the worst. As I magnified further, I noticed the movement of active white blood cells, reacting, organizing, as if they were performing a vital function. My heart raced. Leukocytes do not remain active outside a living organism. That challenged everything I had taught for decades. My throat went dry. I felt a chill that did not come from the environment, but from within. I shifted my field of vision. The tissue from which the blood was oozing began to reveal itself with cruel clarity. It was not skin. It was not common muscle. I immediately recognized the structure. Striated muscle fibers organized in a specific way. My brain diagnosed it before I could stop it. It was cardiac tissue, more precisely, part of the left ventricle, the vital center of human circulation. My legs gave way. I stepped back from the microscope as if it could harm me. The science that had always protected me was now cornering me. That tissue was not just alive. It was suffering. There were clear signs of extreme stress, inflammatory infiltration, as if the tissue was being attacked at that very moment. I was not observing an abstract miracle. I was witnessing pain. It was then that something changed in the air. The metallic smell of blood vanished abruptly. In its place, an intense aroma filled the laboratory. It was not chemical. It was floral, a dense, ancient perfume, impossible to confuse. Fresh roses. The same roses I had sensed years before in the hospital room when Mrs. Isabel Montoya took her last breath. At the time, I ignored it. Now I could not. I fell to my knees on the cold floor. My hands, still stained red, trembled. There were no more arguments. There were no remaining hypotheses. Everything I had built crumbled in silence. For the first time in 10 years, I cried without resistance. It was not fear of death. It was the terror of realizing that I had been wrong my entire life. If you have made it this far, do not leave now. What I did next was the hardest step of my existence. I stayed there for a time I cannot measure. The cold floor of the laboratory seemed the only possible place for someone who had just lost everything they believed to be solid. When I managed to stand up, my legs trembled. I carefully wrapped what I had previously treated as an object of study. It was no longer an experiment. It was presence. I needed to return. I needed to go back to the place where everything had been broken. I left home that night without caring about anyone's gaze. I walked through the silent streets, holding against my chest what I now knew did not belong to me. The city was asleep. The bells had fallen silent. When I arrived at the closed doors of the basilica, I felt a childlike desperation. I knocked, I called out, I waited. When the smaller door opened, I saw the same priest I had challenged hours before. I could not speak. I fell to my knees. I stretched out my hands. I said only that it was true, that I was bleeding, that I was alive. The priest did not accuse me. He did not ask questions. He simply lifted me with a firm and silent embrace. In that gesture, something reorganized inside me. For the first time since Mrs. Isabel Montoya's death, I did not feel alone. I entered the temple as someone returning home after a long inner war. There I left not only what I carried in my hands, but also the weight I carried in my soul. Months later, I agreed to speak publicly, not as provocation, but as responsibility. I went up to the auditorium of the university, where I had built my reputation. I presented tests, independent analyses, documented records. I showed what I saw. I explained what I could not deny. I did not ask them to believe me. I only asked them to look. As I spoke, I saw in the audience the young man I had humiliated. Our eyes met. I inclined my head in silence. He smiled. Today, I continue to be a doctor. I continue to teach. But I am no longer the same man. I learned that science does not lose when it recognizes its limits. It becomes greater. I understood that faith is not escape, but encounter, and that the pain that distanced me from everything was also the path that brought me back. Mrs. Isabel Montoya did not die alone. I was the one who was too blind to see. If you have listened to this testimony up to this point, it was not by chance. Something may also be being reorganized within you if you wish to remain connected to stories that confront, heal, and transform. Subscribe to the channel now. And write in the comments, what did this testimony awaken in you? Your response could touch someone who is still in silence. If you can contribute to ensuring more people have access to stories like this, consider supporting this channel. Every gesture of yours helps bring light where there is still doubt. Today, I know, not every heart is convinced by arguments. Some need to bleed to come back to life. May God bless you always. Amen.